I am Walter Grayson, 68 years old, and until 3 months ago, I genuinely believed I had built something that would outlast me in the best possible way. As the founder of Grayson and Sons Furniture, a company I started in a rented garage in Dayton, Ohio, and grew into a regional chain with 14 showrooms across 3 states, I had spent 43 years pouring everything I had into a legacy for my family. But last Thursday evening, standing frozen in the narrow hallway outside my own kitchen, my entire understanding of that legacy came apart in about 90 seconds. I heard my daughter, Renee, and her husband Marcus talking in low voices about how long it would realistically take before my heart gave out, and about the $4 million in Keyman life insurance the company would pay out the moment it did. Before I tell you exactly how I found out and what I did about it, let me know where you're watching from tonight. Son, daughter, friend, whoever you are, and if you've ever had someone you trusted turn out to be someone else entirely, hit that like button and stay with me, because you're going to want to see how this ends. It started, like most terrible things do, in a way that seemed almost boring. I began waking up around 4 in the morning with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, a kind of jittery, wired exhaustion that no amount of sleep fixed. My hands would tremble slightly when I held my coffee cup, just enough that I started drinking from a mug with a lid so nobody would notice. I chalked it up to stress. I had, after all, just stepped back from day-to-day operations at the company 8 months earlier, handing the CEO title to Renee, who had worked her way up through the business since she was 22, and who I trusted more than anyone alive, including myself some days. Stepping back is supposed to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like I'd handed over the steering wheel of a truck I'd been driving for 4 decades, and my body didn't know what to do with its hands. I went to my doctor, a good man named Phillips, who had treated me for going on 15 years, and he ran the standard panel: blood pressure, cholesterol, a basic metabolic workup. Everything came back within normal range, which should have been reassuring, and instead made me feel crazy. He suggested it might be anxiety related to the transition, maybe early signs of an arrhythmia that wasn't showing up on a resting EKG, and recommended I wear a Holter monitor for a week to track my heart's rhythm continuously. I agreed, mostly to make the tremors and the racing pulse stop being a mystery. What I didn't know then was that the monitor would end up being the least important piece of medical equipment in the whole story, and that the real evidence was going to come from somewhere I never would have thought to look. The tremors got worse over the following weeks. There were mornings I couldn't sign my own name legibly, which was humiliating for a man who used to sign purchase orders for entire shipping containers of oak and walnut without a second thought. My vision would blur in the afternoons. I lost 11 pounds without trying, and my appetite, which had never been a problem in 68 years of loving my late wife Carol's cooking and, after she passed, my own attempts to replicate it, simply evaporated. I told myself I was getting old. That's the story we tell ourselves, isn't it? When the alternative is too monstrous to consider. Old men get tired. Old men shake. Old men lose weight. I filed it all under the heading of getting old, and kept showing up to the office 3 days a week as a consultant, even though Renee had gently suggested, more than once, that I really didn't need to anymore. I want to tell you about my daughter, because you need to understand who I thought she was before I tell you who she turned out to be. Renee was sharp in a way that used to make me proud in board meetings. She could read a balance sheet the way some people read a novel, all the tension and foreshadowing right there in the numbers. She'd married Marcus about 6 years back, a man who worked in what he called strategic finance consulting, which, as far as I could ever tell, meant he moved other people's money around and took a percentage. I never fully warmed to Marcus. He had a way of looking at the showroom floor, at the inventory, at the real estate under our flagship location on Route 4, like he was pricing it out in his head. I told myself that was just how finance people saw the world. I told myself a lot of things. The night everything cracked open, I had come home from a company dinner early because my stomach was bothering me, another symptom I'd added to the pile without examining too closely. My house key still worked on the side door, the one that led in past the kitchen, because I still owned the house Renee and Marcus had been living in with me for the past year while they built their own place, 2 towns over a generous arrangement I'd insisted on after Carol died, so I wouldn't be alone, and so I could help them save on their mortgage while their new house went up. I came in quietly, not because I was trying to sneak, but because that's simply how a tired 68-year-old man moves through his own home at 9 at night. And that's when I heard Marcus's voice from the kitchen, low, almost gentle, the way you'd talk about a horse race. Phillips already ran a full panel and found nothing. That's the beauty of it, Ren. It reads like a heart condition. Slow, natural, deniable. The policy pays out the second the coroner signs off. No waiting period. No investigation. Because there's nothing to investigate. I stood in that hallway with my hand still on the doorframe, and I did not breathe. I want you to understand that. I did not breathe, because some animal part of my brain understood, faster than the rest of me could catch up, that breathing would give me away, and that whatever was happening in that kitchen was not something I was supposed to survive finding out about. Renee's voice came next, and it was the voice I recognized from 1,000 ordinary evenings, which somehow made it worse. I don't want to talk about the amount again. I just want to know the timeline. Phillips said the tremors are consistent with a slow cardiac decline if nobody's looking for anything else. How much longer, realistically? 6 weeks, maybe 8, if we don't get impatient, Marcus said. The company carries $4 million on him. Your name's already on the trust as sole successor trustee since he restructured it after your mother died. It doesn't get cleaner than this. I don't remember deciding to leave. My body simply carried me back out the side door, down the porch steps, into my own car in my own driveway, where I sat with both hands locked on the steering wheel until they stopped shaking. Or maybe they never stopped and I simply stopped noticing, because the shaking that mattered now was somewhere much deeper than my hands. I drove to a 24-hour diner on Wilmington Pike, the kind of place with orange vinyl booths and a waitress who's worked there since Reagan was president. And I sat with a cup of coffee I never drank, and I made myself think instead of feel, because feeling in that moment would have swallowed me whole. My tremors, my heart palpitations, the weight loss, the blurred vision, symptoms with no clear diagnosis, symptoms that read, in Marcus's chilling phrase, like a heart condition. Slow, natural, deniable. Someone was poisoning me. My own daughter knew about it, and I had absolutely no proof, no plan, and no idea how much time I actually had. I am not, by nature, a man who does things halfway, which is either my best quality or my worst, depending on which decade of my life you ask about. So instead of confronting them that night, instead of calling the police with nothing but an overheard conversation and a 68-year-old man's word against a woman with an MBA and a husband who could probably talk his way out of a bank vault, I decided I needed evidence. Real evidence. The kind that doesn't evaporate under a good lawyer's cross-examination. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in probably 15 years. I took the city bus instead of driving myself, because I genuinely wasn't sure my hands would hold the wheel steady, and because some instinct told me I needed to be around ordinary people doing ordinary things, while my own life turned into something unrecognizable. I was heading to see an old friend, Dale Whitfield, who ran a small pharmacy compounding business out near the university, and who had, decades ago, back when Grayson and Sons was just me and 2 employees, given me my first commercial lease on generous terms when nobody else would take a chance on a furniture maker with no track record. I trusted Dale, and Dale, it turned out, was about to become the second most important person in this whole story. I sat near the back of the bus, holding a to-go coffee I still couldn't stomach drinking, and an older woman sat down across the aisle from me with grocery bags at her feet. She looked at me for a long moment, longer than strangers usually look at each other, and said, quietly, almost like she was afraid of being overheard herself, "Sir, are you feeling all right? Your color isn't good, and your hands are shaking pretty badly." I told her I was fine, the automatic lie we all reach for. But she didn't look convinced, and she introduced herself as Dorothy, a retired hospice nurse who'd spent 30 years reading exactly the kind of physical signs I was apparently broadcasting without knowing it. She asked, gently, whether I was on any new medications, any new supplements, anything that had changed recently in my daily routine. And I said no, nothing, except that my daughter had started making me a special tea every morning about 10 weeks back, something she called an energy and focus blend. She said she'd found through a wellness consultant, meant to help with the stress of stepping back from the company. Dorothy went very still. She asked me what was in it. I told her I didn't know exactly, some kind of herbal mixture Renee prepared herself, in a little glass jar she kept in our kitchen, and that I drank a cup every single morning because it seemed to help me relax, or at least I'd told myself it did. Dorothy asked if she could write something down for me, and on the back of a grocery receipt, in shaky handwriting of her own, she wrote 3 words: heavy metal panel. She told me that certain heavy metal poisonings, administered slowly over weeks or months, produce exactly the constellation of symptoms I'd described: tremor, palpitations, vision changes, unexplained weight loss, and that they often don't show up on standard blood work unless a doctor specifically knows to test for them, because nobody thinks to look for arsenic or thallium in a 68-year-old man with a stressful life. She told me, with a kind of quiet urgency I will never forget, that if what I was describing was real, I needed to stop drinking that tea immediately, and I needed to get tested specifically, by name, for heavy metals, that very week. I want to be honest with you about something, because the comments on stories like this always ask the same question, and I understand why. Some of you are going to ask why I didn't simply throw out the tea that morning and never touch it again. Here is the truth. If I stopped drinking it and said nothing, Renee and Marcus would know within days that something had changed, that I'd gotten suspicious, and they would either destroy the evidence, switch methods, or simply wait me out with more patience and more caution the second time. I needed the tea itself, tested and documented, sitting in an evidence bag with a clean chain of custody, before I ever let them know I suspected anything at all. So for 11 more days, I poured that tea down the bathroom sink every single morning while Renee watched me leave the kitchen with an empty cup, and I refilled a second, identical jar I'd bought myself with plain chamomile, switching the contents late at night while the house was quiet, so that anyone testing my actual consumption or watching the level in the jar go down would see exactly what they expected to see. Dale Whitfield helped me get a private lab test done quietly, using a small sample I'd managed to scrape from the bottom of the original jar into a sealed container, without going through my regular doctor's office where Renee, as my medical power of attorney on file since Carol's passing, would have had visibility into any new testing I ordered. The results came back 9 days later. Elevated thallium levels, consistent with sustained low-dose exposure over a period of 2 to 3 months. Thallium, the technician explained to me over the phone in a voice that made it clear she dealt with far more accidental industrial exposures than deliberate ones, is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and historically has been called the poisoner's poison, because it mimics natural decline so convincingly that it went undetected in criminal cases for decades. It made sense of everything. The tremors, the blurred vision, the mysterious cardiac symptoms that read, in Marcus's own words, like a natural decline. I sat in Dale's back office with that lab report in my hands, and I felt something shift in me that I can only describe as the moment grief turns into resolve. I was not going to die confused and afraid in my own house while my daughter counted down the weeks on a spreadsheet. I was going to find out everything, document everything, and make sure that when this came out, and it was going to come out, there would be no question, no ambiguity, no lawyer clever enough to explain it away. Here is where the story slows down, and I want you to sit with me in this part, because this was the hardest stretch, harder in some ways than the moment I overheard them in the kitchen. For the next several weeks, I lived a double life inside my own home. I smiled at my daughter over breakfast. I asked Marcus about his golf game. I let Renee brief me on quarterly numbers from the business, nodding along, asking the sharp questions I'd always asked, while somewhere underneath all of it a voice in my head kept repeating the same sentence. She is watching me get sicker on purpose. I dumped the tea. I documented dates in a small notebook I kept locked in my truck. I began quietly gathering financial records. Because a man doesn't restructure a trust to make his daughter sole successor trustee without leaving a paper trail, and Dale connected me with a retired forensic accountant named Priscilla Voss, who owed him a favor from years back. What Priscilla found, over the following month, turned my stomach in an entirely different way than the thallium had. Marcus wasn't simply a finance consultant living comfortably off Renee's salary. He had, over the past 3 years, personally lost close to $2 million in a series of increasingly desperate trading positions, money that turned out to have been quietly siphoned from a joint account he shared with Renee, an account that, unbeknownst to her, he had also used as collateral against a private loan from a man named Curtis Boyle, who Priscilla's contacts described, carefully, as someone whose business associates preferred not to discuss him with law enforcement. Marcus was drowning. My $4 million keyman policy, which named the company as primary beneficiary, but which, per the terms of the trust restructuring, would flow directly through Renee as trustee before any distribution to operational accounts, wasn't just a windfall to Marcus, it was survival. And Renee, my daughter, the girl I'd taught to read a balance sheet at her father's knee, had either been convinced by her husband that this was a mercy, my declining health simply hastened rather than manufactured, or had known exactly what she was participating in, and told herself whatever story let her keep participating. I still don't fully know which of those two things is true, and some nights that uncertainty is the thing that keeps me awake more than the poisoning itself did. There is a scene I have to tell you about, because it was the moment I nearly lost my nerve entirely. About 3 weeks into my quiet investigation, Marcus found me in the garage one evening, where I'd gone to be alone with my thoughts among the workbenches I still keep from the company's early days. He asked how I was feeling, and there was something in his face, a kind of clinical assessment, like he was checking inventory, that made my skin crawl in a way I hadn't let myself feel until that exact second. He said, almost gently, "You look tired, Walter. Have you thought any more about slowing down completely? Renee worries about you pushing yourself too hard at your age." And I understood, standing there among 40 years of sawdust and memory, that this man was managing my decline the way he'd manage a portfolio, patiently, professionally, waiting for the numbers to hit their target. I told him I was fine, that I felt better than I had in weeks, actually, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes, something that might have been surprise, or might have been the first thread of suspicion that his timeline was slipping. That flicker told me I was running out of runway. I couldn't wait for a full financial forensic picture anymore. I had a lab report proving poisoning, a private detective's documentation of Marcus's debt to Curtis Boyle, and 11 weeks of my own notebook logging dates, symptoms, and the tea. It was enough. It had to be enough, because I didn't know how much longer I had before they either finished what they started or changed their method entirely. I went to the FBI field office in Dayton myself, on a Tuesday morning, because attempted murder tied to a $4 million insurance policy and a documented criminal loan shark connection crosses state and federal lines fast once you start pulling threads, and Dale had a contact there through his own business dealings, an agent named Raymond Castellano who specialized in white-collar financial crime with violent elements. I sat across from Agent Castellano and laid out the lab report, the notebook, Priscilla's financial documentation, all of it, on a folding table in a small gray room, and I watched a career federal investigator's face go carefully, professionally blank in the specific way that told me he understood exactly how serious this was. What followed took another 19 days, and this was the part where I had to be an actor in my own life every single morning, knowing federal agents were quietly building a case around me while I sat at my own breakfast table pretending nothing had changed. Castellano's team subpoenaed the financial records Priscilla had already sketched the outline of. They interviewed the wellness consultant Renee claimed had recommended the tea blend, who, it turned out, had never met Renee in person and had no record of any such recommendation, meaning Renee herself, not some outside consultant, had sourced the thallium, likely through Marcus's own murky financial underworld connections. They traced 2 cash withdrawals Marcus had made from the joint account in amounts just under the reporting threshold, timed suspiciously close to when my symptoms first began. The morning they made the arrest, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd overheard nothing directly, but had eaten 1,000 ordinary breakfasts across 68 years of life. When 3 unmarked vehicles pulled into my driveway, I watched through the window as agents approached the front door, and I want to tell you honestly that in that moment, I did not feel triumphant. I felt exhausted and sad in a way that surprised me, because some stubborn, foolish part of a father's heart keeps hoping, right up until the handcuffs, that there's an explanation that doesn't end this way. There wasn't. Renee was arrested on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and elder abuse under Ohio statute. Marcus faced those same charges alongside additional federal charges tied to the loan from Curtis Boyle, whose own operation, it turned out, agents had been separately investigating for over a year, meaning my case became one small thread in a much larger financial crimes prosecution. The trial, when it finally came 8 months later, was mercifully brief, because the physical evidence, the thallium in my system, independently confirmed by a second toxicology test ordered by the prosecution, the financial trail, and Marcus's own recorded conversation with an informant inside Boyle's organization discussing the Grayson situation resolving itself naturally, left almost nothing for a defense attorney to work with. Renee took a plea agreement that reduced her sentence in exchange for testimony against Marcus, admitting that she had known about the thallium, had sourced it through one of Marcus's contacts after he assured her it would be peaceful and undetectable, and had convinced herself, in her own words to the court, that she was doing something merciful for a father whose best years, Marcus had told her repeatedly, were already behind him anyway. She received 11 years. Marcus, convicted on the full range of charges including the attempted murder count without the benefit of a cooperation deal, received 22 years in federal prison. I sat in that courtroom every single day of the trial, and I will tell you, the hardest moment wasn't the verdict. It was watching my daughter, in an orange jumpsuit, finally look at me across that room during her allocution and say, in a broken voice, I hadn't heard from her since she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms, "I'm sorry, Dad." I told myself it wasn't real until it was too late to stop. I believe she meant it. I also believe that meaning it doesn't undo what she did, and learning to hold both of those truths at once has been the real education of the past year. Harder in its own way than surviving the poison itself. I legally restructured the entire trust the following month, with new legal counsel and a court-appointed guardian ad litem overseeing the process to ensure nothing could later be challenged as coerced or improper. Renee was removed entirely as any kind of beneficiary or trustee. I redirected the company's succession plan to a longtime employee, a woman named Angela Ferris, who had started on our warehouse floor 22 years ago and worked her way up to regional operations director, someone who had never once, in over 2 decades, given me a single reason to doubt her. Dorothy, the retired hospice nurse from the bus, became someone I now have coffee with once a month, an unlikely friendship born out of the worst morning of my life. I found out, doing a little digging of my own after everything settled, that she'd spent much of her retirement quietly volunteering at a senior center, watching for exactly the kinds of warning signs that too often go unnoticed in older adults: financial exploitation, unexplained physical decline, sudden changes in medication or diet, introduced by a trusted family member. I asked her once why she'd said something to a total stranger on a city bus, instead of minding her own business, the way most of us are trained to do. And she told me that 30 years of hospice work teaches you that silence, more often than people realize, is how the worst things happen to people who trusted the wrong person to take care of them. I still own Grayson and Sons. I go into the flagship showroom 2 mornings a week now, not because the company needs me. Angela runs it better than I ever did if I'm being completely honest, but because the smell of cut oak and the sound of the loading dock in the morning reminds me that I built something real with my own 2 hands. Something that existed before any of this happened and will exist long after I'm gone, in the right hands this time. I drink my coffee black now, no lid on the mug, because I've earned the right to let my hands shake from age alone, if they ever do again, without wondering what's causing it. I think about Renee more than I probably should, given everything. I visit her twice a year, because she is still my daughter, and because Carol, if she were still here, would have insisted I find a way to hold on to love, even where it had been so badly betrayed, without excusing what it cost me. We don't talk about the trial. We talk about small things. The weather, a book she's reading in the prison library, whether the maple trees on our old street have turned yet. It isn't forgiveness, not exactly, and I'm honestly not sure it ever will be, but it's something quieter and more complicated than hatred. And at 68 years old, having survived what I survived, I've learned that quieter and more complicated is usually where the truth actually lives. If there is one thing I would say to you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight, it's this: love your children with everything you have, and still watch for the wolves, because sometimes they are wearing the faces you trust the most, and the people who are supposed to protect you can become the very danger you need protecting from. Trust your gut when something in your own body or your own home feels wrong, even when every test comes back clean, even when everyone around you insists you're simply getting older. And if a stranger on a bus ever looks at you with concern in their eyes and asks if you're all right, don't brush them off the way I nearly did. Sometimes the people who save your life are the ones who owe you absolutely nothing at all. I am alive. I am free. And every morning now, when I wake up with steady hands and a clear head, I understand exactly what that quiet, ordinary gift is worth. Because I know now, better than most people ever have to learn, exactly what it costs to almost lose it.